Whenever I think about how the wrong ending can spoil an otherwise good story, I always remember an episode of Night Gallery called They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar. Written by series creator Rod Serling, the story is about Randy Lane, a middle aged sales executive at a plastics company who spirals into depression after he learns that his beloved old neighborhood bar is scheduled to be demolished to make way for a new high rise bank building. The bar has been an important place in Randy's life for as long as he can remember, the site of some of his best memories. And as the story unfolds, he finds himself increasingly drawn into those memories, reliving them and wanting to escape into them permanently. The basic concept is one of Rod Serling's favorites. An aging professional is disillusioned with his life in the present and yearns to recapture his past glory or to exit the rat race for a simpler and more satisfying way of life. How many episodes of The Twilight Zone does that describe? The problem with their tearing down Tim Riley's bar isn't the well-worn premise, nor is the problem the execution of that premise. Even though Serling has told more or less this same story several times before, the episode doesn't come across as a rehash. If you watch it with a critical eye and a knowledge of Serling's previous work, you can recognize pieces of previous projects, but they combine into something that feels like its own thing, not an assemblage of reused tropes. For example, Randy, the protagonist, is a variation on a character we've seen Serling use over and over again. He's reminiscent of Martin Sloan from the Twilight Zone episode Walking Distance, an ad agency executive who returns to his hometown and finds everything and everyone just as they were 25 years ago, including his parents and his younger self. Randy is also made of some of the same stuff as Gart Williams from A Stop at Willoughby, who is also an ad executive and who, pushed to a mental breaking point by the stress of his job, wants to quit and relocate to the idyllic late 19th century town that has mysteriously appeared as a stop on his train ride home. Gart, like Randy, has had a rough go of it on the job lately and works for an unsympathetic and unappreciative boss. That Randy doesn't come across as Martin Sloan or Gart Williams with a different name is to the credit of Serling, who shows off his talent for creating specific individuals out of general types, and of William Wyndham, who plays Randy, a prolific character actor whose career in film and television spanned more than 50 years. Wyndham brings Randy to life as a tragic figure writ small, an unremarkable man who has led an unremarkable life, but who expresses himself in the idiom of the hero of a great classical drama, monologuing at length about his beautiful youth and his late wife and all the dreams he had that never came true. Rod Serling liked to write characters that were equal parts heartbroken and hyper-articulate, and Wyndham effortlessly delivers page after page of Randy's laments and reminiscences, rendering the character as verbose and morose, but never tiresome. Preventing him from becoming an intolerable sad sack and also adding to his tragedy is the fact that Randy maintains a clear self-awareness throughout the episode. He's taking the imminent destruction of Tim Riley's bar very hard, about to drown in unresolved grief for his dead wife and regret amplified by alcohol, but he's not oblivious to it or trying to hide it. He knows that by continually looking toward his past, he is compromising his present and jeopardizing his future, but he does it anyway. He can't help it. He's convinced that everything worth having is back there. On the strength of Wyndham's lead performance, supported by an ensemble that includes Diane Baker, John Randolph, and future Super Password host Bert Convey, and Serling's long-winded but eloquent writing, They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar is an engrossing, moving episode. Until the last few minutes. So here's what happens. Randy has been reliving episodes from his past, most frequently the welcome home party his family and friends threw for him at Tim Riley's bar when he returned from World War II. The more preoccupied he becomes with these memories, the more Randy's already slipping performance at work begins to suffer, until one day his boss, Mr. Pritkin, fires him. Randy gathers his few personal belongings from his office and leaves, announcing on his way out the door that he is off to attend a homecoming at Tim Riley's bar. After Randy leaves, his former secretary, Lynn, gives Mr. Pritkin a piece of her mind on Randy's behalf, reminding Pritkin of Randy's 25 years of service to the company, telling Pritkin all he needed was a gentle word to let him know he had worth.
That much you could have given him. That much, Mr. Pritkin. You should have given him.
Randy arrives at the site of Tim Riley's bar as the construction crew is preparing to begin the demolition. At first, the place is empty, but then all of a sudden, it's 1945 again, and there's Tim Riley, and there's Randy's father, and there's Katie, Randy's wife, just as he has always remembered her. Everyone begins to sing, for he's a jolly good fellow. Randy is surrounded by family and friends. He's happy. He's home. It doesn't last. Their singing is interrupted by the sound of the jackhammers outside on the street in the real world, and despite Randy urging them to ignore what's happening outside and stay and continue the party, one by one all these ghosts from his past fade away. Katie, last of all. One of the construction workers chases Randy out, and he shuffles down the street, hopeless, aimless, oblivious to traffic. But then, just audible below the racket of the heavy equipment, Randy hears another group of people singing For He's a Jolly Good Fellow from inside Antoine's restaurant, his favorite spot for lunch. Randy walks inside to investigate and finds Lynn and Mr. Pritkin and McDermott, the cop who's known him since he was young, and all of Randy's friends and co-workers from the office. They're waiting for him. It's his party. Mr. Pritkin apologizes to Randy for mistreating him and taking him for granted, thanks him for his contributions to the company, and reverses his firing, lifting his glass to Randy with a toast of, "Here's to the past 25 years and the next 25. As Randy embraces his friends at Antoine's, the wrecking ball smashes into the sign above Tim Riley's bar. But Randy no longer cares. He has found a new appreciation for life in the present, and his past is being reduced to dust. All is as it should be. This ending sucks. Perhaps if you've never seen this show and you're only going by my description of it, you might have the impression that this ending is uplifting and cathartic, a parting grace note bestowed upon a suffering character, a gentle reminder to us all not to neglect now in favor of then, because ultimately now is all we have. If that is the case, I have given you an inaccurate impression, at least from where I'm sitting. Possibly that was the effect Rod Serling intended when he wrote that ending. However, it is not the effect that is accomplished when I watch They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar. Instead of hopeful, uplifting, all those positive adjectives, it comes across as clumsy, delusionally upbeat, and utterly incongruous with everything leading up to it. Verisimilitude gets chucked out the window. It may well have made a fine conclusion to something else, but this story should not have this ending. For one thing, in the literal reading of the episode, and the literal reading of a story is often not the most important reading, but it's also not totally irrelevant, there is almost no setup for this ending. We get one brief scene of Lynn tearing into Mr. Pritkin, ending on Pritkin looking regretful for how he treated Randy, and the next time we see Pritkin a couple of minutes later, he has changed his mind about firing Randy and found it within himself to apologize and express deeply felt and long overdue gratitude to Randy. And I guess Lynn organized the party and reserved the dining room at Antoine's? Good thing that didn't take very long. And good thing Randy just so happened to be passing close enough to Antoine's to hear everyone singing inside too, huh? It's a work of fiction. And beyond that, it's a work of fantasy, so I'm ready and willing to suspend my disbelief up to a point. I'll buy that Lynn and Pritkin opted to have Randy's party at Antoine's, because not only is Antoine's a place Randy likes to go, it's located just down the block from Tim Riley's bar, and Randy made sure everyone knew he was headed to Tim Riley's bar as he exited the office after being fired. But what if Randy had walked off in the other direction after leaving Tim Riley's? Or what if he hadn't been allowed to walk off at all? There's an earlier scene where a drunk Randy breaks into Tim Riley's and is found by two cops. If not for the timely intervention of his friend, Officer McDermott, Those two cops would have arrested him then. What if Randy had been arrested for trespassing on the former site of Tim Riley's again? Or what if Randy did walk off in the right direction, but couldn't hear the singing coming from Antoine's over the pounding of the construction equipment, and just kept on going? Or what if he did hear the singing, but wasn't curious enough to go in and see what was going on? Yes, it's a story. Yes, at a certain point, things happen the way they happen because that's the way the writer wants them to happen. But the circumstances of this ending are so convenient that I can't help but ask these questions. How long were they all in there singing and waiting for Randy to show up anyway? Even a simple little change like having Randy hear the singing, start to walk away, then having Lynn rush out of the restaurant to get him and bring him inside would have been better. It wouldn't have completely fixed it, but it would have been better. It wouldn't have completely fixed it because the real problem isn't the implausibility of the sequence of events. It's the tone. They're tearing down Tim Riley's bar is a sad story. Randy is a man who has lost the ability to imagine better times still to come. He believes his good days are all behind him, trapped in Tim Riley's bar with his younger, happier self. His wife is dead. His friends and family are gone. All he seems to have in his life is his job, and he feels that slipping away day by day as he is overtaken by a fresher, hungrier, rising executive. He's haunted by the ghosts of his past, and he himself has become a ghost in the present, drifting back again and again to the abandoned shell of Tim Riley's bar, or the house where he once lived with his wife, where they planned the life they would never have. I'm not saying a sad story ought to be required to have a downbeat ending, or that the episode should have faded to black when Randy passed out drunk in a gutter or something. A sad story that concludes on a hopeful note can be a beautiful thing if done properly, but I said hopeful note, not dissonant note. The ending of They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar is so thoroughly upbeat that it feels like Randy has abruptly switched from romanticizing his past to romanticizing his present. All his problems and causes of stress are suddenly gone. The only thing missing is his wife Katie walking in at the end, miraculously resurrected and ready to make up for lost time. The episode maybe could have done with an ending that represented a faint glow of sunrise. This isn't that. This is a smash cut from a frozen night in the dead of winter to the warmest, brightest, most beautiful day of the year. It doesn't play as heartwarming and life-affirming. It plays as bullshit. Multiple levels of bullshit, too. In addition to the tone problem, there's also a pretty serious theme problem. Like all great stories, or potentially great stories in this case, They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar is about more than what it is literally about. Randy Lane isn't just a lonely man drinking himself into unemployment. He's the embodiment of the disillusionment and dissatisfaction a lot of people who fought World War II grappled with in the decades after the war. Randy joined the military, went overseas, presumably saw some rough stuff, presumably lost some comrades, but he survived and returned home and was welcomed as a hero and married his sweetheart and got a good job and had his whole life ahead of him. Then, 25 years later, it was all gone. William Wyndham gets several lengthy theatrical monologues as Randy. Here's a bit of the best one, I think, from the scene where Officer McDermott finds Randy drunk at the vacant space that used to be Tim Riley's bar, and Randy puts how he feels about the state of his life into words.
McDermott, I've put in my time, you understand that? I've paid my dues. I shouldn't be hustled to death in the daytime and then die of loneliness every night. That's not the dream. That's not what it's about.
He's not only speaking for himself, he's speaking for many in his generation. Hell, he's speaking for many in every generation. When we're growing up, we're given the impression that life is supposed to go a certain way. You do well in school, you get a job, you work hard, you do right by other people, and good things follow from that. For a lot of folks, that is how life goes. But when it doesn't, when you do what you were told you were supposed to do, and you get to be Randy's age, and you haven't got any of those things you were supposed to have, that can be devastating. Here in my country, for as long as anyone can remember, we've been raised to want to chase the American dream, whatever that is. Buying a new car, owning a home, earning enough money to live comfortably while raising a family, being able to take a vacation once a year, retirement, any of that, all of that. It's vague, the American dream. It's difficult to define. You may not even know when you've got it, but you know when you don't. That's what Randy's dealing with. That's what the story is about, until the ending. Don't worry, folks. Are you exhausted and depressed after working your ass off for 25 years with nothing to show for it? Are you having an existential crisis because you've realized the American dream is the cheese in the mousetrap? Well, it's all going to be okay. Your life is a wreck, and you've got a pretty heavy drinking problem because that's the only way you know to numb the pain? Hang in there, buddy. Something will come along. You've got a lot of people pulling for you. Because the ending clashes so strongly with the rest of the story, one might assume it wasn't the intended ending, that it was insisted upon by a studio executive who didn't want to depress the audience. That is not the case. The ending you see when you watch They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar is the ending Rod Serling wanted. But why? As he himself acknowledged many times, Serling was not a perfect writer, but he was also one of the best TV writers of his generation, or any other generation for that matter. Surely he could have come up with something better to close out this episode than a condescending pat on the head. Maybe Serling was worried about repeating himself. As I said, by the early 1970s, Serling had told this same basic story many times. One of his first big successes as a TV writer was Patterns, a teleplay he wrote which was originally staged live on Kraft Television Theater in 1955 and was later produced as a film. Patterns is similar to They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar in many ways. The hero, Andy Sloan, is an aging businessman who feels himself being pushed out the door by an uncaring boss and a younger co-worker. The conflict between the protagonist and the boss is more central in Patterns, and the younger co-worker, named Fred Staples, is a sympathetic figure rather than a villain, but the general shape of the story is largely the same. The big difference between Patterns and They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar is that the protagonist of Patterns dies of a heart attack in the second-to-last scene, following a final confrontation with the boss. The ending consists of the other characters regrouping in the aftermath of his death. Unlike Mr. Pritkin in They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar, the boss in Patterns, Mr. Ramsey, is unrepentant to the end. He refuses to apologize or change his ways even following Sloane's death. Here, it's the younger rival to the protagonist, Staples, who delivers the big speech telling the boss what a bastard he is. There's no happy ending. Nothing much really changes. Following the death of Sloane, Staples at first intends to quit in protest of Ramsey's treatment of Sloane, but he ultimately decides to stay. Staples and Ramsey agree on terms that are acceptable to them both. They don't like each other, but neither man sees a better option than continuing on. It's a much bleaker story. In They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar, Randy is trapped in the demanding but unfulfilling life of a businessman. In Patterns, they all seem trapped, even the boss. In that final scene with Staples, Sloane describes his own company as a beast that needs to be fed.
This is no one's business. It belongs only to the best. To those who can keep it growing, producing, keep it alive. It belongs to us today, yes. But in the future, it belongs to whoever can give it more.
In Patterns, the characters are all enslaved to capitalism, forced to pursue greater and greater profits to keep the machine running. The best they can hope for is to retain some small measure of conscience or dignity in the effort. The relevant point here isn't whether Patterns is better than They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar, but that it's more consistent. The conclusion isn't at odds with the rest of it. Again, I'm not saying They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar needs a bleak ending in order to work. It just needs an ending that doesn't feel like it was pasted in from a different story entirely. Is there a way to tell this story with a hopeful ending that works? I mentioned a couple of thematically similar Twilight Zone episodes before. There's one I haven't mentioned yet. It's an episode of The Twilight Zone, but it wasn't written by Serling himself. It was written by E. Jack Newman. Yet it's the one that I think bears the closest resemblance to They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar. It's called The Trouble with Templeton, and it's the story not of an aging businessman, but an aging actor. Once a great star of the stage, Booth Templeton is now past his prime, married to a younger woman who doesn't seem interested in him, and he's taken a part in a new play with an ambitious and aggressive director who doesn't respect him. He leaves the rehearsal space and finds that he has somehow traveled back in time to 1927, when he was starring in a hit play. He goes to the speakeasy he used to frequent and finds his old friend Barney, the playwright, waiting for him there alongside Laura, Booth's wife, who, from Booth's perspective, has been dead for 20 years. A beloved bygone hangout spot, a beautiful lost love, a visitation to a romanticized past. The similarities to They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar are apparent, but it's the differences that are important. When Templeton returns to his glory days, he finds them to be not nearly as glorious as he remembered. Laura, who has lived in his memory all these years as this perfect being, is fickle and shallow and seems bored by Templeton. Barney is more concerned with what Booth is planning on eating and drinking than anything else. Neither Laura nor Barney are nearly as happy to see Booth as he is to see them. Eventually, they tire of Templeton's overbearing sentimentality, and Laura tells him to leave, and he does, hurt, confused, and disappointed. We linger for a moment and see that Laura, Barney, and everyone else in the speakeasy are standing in sad silence, and the room fades slowly to darkness in Templeton's absence. Outside and back in the present day once again, Templeton examines a script that he had snatched out of Laura's hands in anger and realizes that it's not a script for a play, but a script for everything that just happened to him in the speakeasy. The things that Laura and Barney said to Templeton, there they are in the script. And the title, What to Do When Booth Comes Back. They were acting for me, Templeton realizes. They wanted me to go back to my own life and live it. As the episode concludes, Booth Templeton seems determined to do just that. He returns to the play rehearsal, ready to work. He tells the director to call him Mr. Templeton, claiming the respect that an actor of his experience and stature deserves. He's going to make the most of the opportunity in front of him, instead of gazing longingly over his shoulder at what's behind him. Again, Rod Serling didn't write The Trouble with Templeton, but it is an episode of the series he created, and I'm sure he watched it, in addition to reading the script and being involved in its production in various other ways. I wish he had drawn on it for a bit of inspiration when it came time to write the ending to They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar. The ending of The Trouble with Templeton is sentimental, but it also fits with the rest of the episode. It doesn't transform the story into a reassuring children's fairy tale at the last minute. Maybe I'm wrong, though. Maybe Serling didn't write the ending he wrote because he was worried about repeating himself. Maybe at this point in his life, he identified with the character of Randy a little too much. Serling was in his early 30s when he wrote Patterns, much younger than the protagonist, Andy Sloan. When he wrote They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar more than 15 years later, he was essentially the same age as his protagonist, give or take a couple of years. Serling's own life was unlike the life he invented for Randy in many ways, but they shared a few things in common. Serling was a veteran of World War II. As a professional writer, first for radio and then for television and film, Serling certainly understood pressure, frustration, and disillusionment. And this might not mean anything, but whether he knew it or not, when They're Tearing Down Tim Riley's Bar premiered, Serling was only a little over 4 years away from the end of his life. In June of 1975, at merely 50 years of age, he died following a series of heart attacks, the result of a lifelong heavy smoking habit that ironically had provided one of the visual trademarks of his on-camera persona. Were the choices he made while writing this episode influenced by the angst and growing panic regarding the approach of mortality that most middle-aged people experience? Hi. Or did Serling somehow sense that he was much closer to his own conclusion than most people his age? And did that compel him to toss a life preserver to Randy, his creation and counterpart? It's all speculation on my part. I don't know. What I do know is that Serling takes pity on Randy at the end. And in doing so, he lets himself off the hook as the writer and fails to serve his story. Creatively, artistically, it's a bad decision. I can't be mad at him for it, though. The ending spoils it, but everything up to that point is classic Serling: the verbosity, the righteous indignation at injustices both petty and significant, the unfailing compassion, and the unshakable belief in the dignity and worth of people. That he goes too soft on the ending is unfortunate, but understandable, especially if it was done for the reason I was just speculating about. If Serling identified too closely with Randy because he too felt like his best days were behind him, that he was running out of time to do everything he wanted to do, to fulfill his potential, to make up for past mistakes, well, that would only make him a human being, wouldn't it? Verisimilitude be damned. We'd all write a happy ending for ourselves, if we could.